All right, so we're talking today, 19.1, stretching, compressing, reflecting, sine and cosine graphs, day 1. So looking at this, at our unit circle, what we're going to be doing is graphing the different points that go along the circle. So we're going to take them and graph them out linear as if this were a ball and it was rolling along, and we were graphing the different values along the way. Sine uses the y value. So it's like if we could stretch out the path of the ball and we could roll it around and have it hit a marker every time that y went up, we would be graphing these y values. Those are key important values. We call them the zeros and the mins and the maxes. Sine uses the y value of an ordered pair on the unit circle. So we're going to use a very specific method that you will see in trig. So hopefully when you see it in trig, it'll help resonate and make sense with you. And it won't look like a foreign language. So let me see if I can move my board just right. We're going to use a 5-point table of values. We are going to graph from 0 to 2 pi because we're graphing this basic sine function. When we're looking here at the 0, any point at this right here, our y value is actually 0. It's also 0 at 2 pi because they're in the same spot. Then when we move up here to pi over 2, the y value is 1. And over here, at pi, the y value is 0 again. And down here at 3 pi, our y value is -1. And remember, this is called a unit circle because we're talking about the unit being 1. If we were to graph that, 0, 0 is here. At pi over 2, we're up at 1. At pi, we're back at 0. And at 3 pi over 2, we're at -1, and then back 2 pi is at 0. We're going to graph these with a smooth curve and realize that this, although going down, is going to come up, it's going to go back down, and it's going to come up. This is your basic sine function. It will always have this distinct pattern. It is the general function of sine. Our general equation is f of x equals a times sine of 1 over b times x. A still stretches the graph vertically. It's actually going to change our amplitude, and we're going to talk about what that means in a minute. 1 over b stretches or compresses the graph horizontally, and it's going to tell us how many times that cycle, this pattern occurs within 2 pi. Okay, so we're going to look at a few vocabulary words first. And they're kind of up here. So a graph repeats in cycles. The length of the time it takes to repeat that cycle is called a period. The maximum on your graph is called the crest. The minimum is called the trough. Halfway between the crest and the trough is called the midline. So if you're looking at your graph that we just did, the x-axis actually represents that midline on the sine function. The distance from the midline to the crest or the midline to the trough is called the amplitude. The a value in our equation tells us the amplitude. The b tells us how many times a cycle occurs in 2 pi. We're going to look at a couple basic examples, and we're going to do some more examples tomorrow, and we're going to actually do some more practice tomorrow. So some key things to identify: f of x, 3 times the sine of 2x. That means my amplitude is 3. That means my graph is going to go to a maximum of 3 and a minimum of -3. To figure out the period, we have to take our b value and multiply it times 2 pi. Now remember, this here is 1 over b, which means if it's a whole number, b is really 1/2. So to find the period, you take 1/2 times 2 pi. So you have to figure out what your b value is and multiply that by 2 pi to figure out how long the period is. The period is the length of the time it takes for our cycle to repeat. Simplify this down, and that's just pi. That's what we put at the end of our little 5-point scale. From here, we do halves. So halfway between 0 and pi is pi over 2. Halfway between 0 and pi over 2 is pi over 4. And halfway between pi over 2 and pi is 3 pi over 4. Think about it in quarters. If this is $1, this is 50 cents, 25 cents, 75 cents. And now we need to figure out, okay, so our zeros. Remember, our graph always has zeros for the sine function on the ends and in the middle. It has a maximum first because a is positive, so it's going to go to positive 3, and it has a minimum second, negative 3. We're going to use that table to graph. So we have 0, 0. Now, notice on here, I don't have a pi over 4, but I know that it's halfway between 0 and pi over 2, and that's going to be up here somewhere. This is truly pi over 6, and this is pi over 3. Then, I know at pi, pi over 2, it's at 0, and halfway between pi over 2 and pi, so halfway between is going to be at negative 3, and then back at 0. And we can keep that pattern going, because most of the time they're going to ask you to graph all the way out to 2 pi. So you know that this one's going to be high halfway between here, and it's going to go 0, and then halfway between here is going to be down here and there. So you can kind of just keep the pattern going. Even though it only takes to go to pi, in 2 pi we repeat twice. That's what this tells us. Within 2 pi we're repeating that cycle twice. So we're going to go up and down and up and down and up and down. And there we go. There is our graph. So we're going to now practice how to write the equation. So let me move the swivel over just a little so that we get a better view. There, make it a little bit more focused for you. We're going to write the equation for the graph. So just like we've always done, we're given a graph, we're going to write the equation. The nice thing is that we're only talking about sine today, so you should recognize that this is a sine. The other way to recognize is it starts at a 0, ends at a 0. Okay, so amplitude is the easiest thing to spot out of here. It's how high or how low our graph goes. So since it's going to positive 2 and negative 2, that means our amplitude is 2. We need to figure out the b value. And to do so, we need to recognize that we used, to find the period, we used 2 pi times b. So we need to look at this and go, okay, if I start here to come back to here, that's where it starts repeating. So that's equal to 2. And we're going to solve this for b. Pretty simple. Divide by 2 pi both sides. That gives me b is 1 over pi. But remember, when we write it into the equation, we don't want b, we want 1 over b. So if I have to flip this over, then that means this gets flipped over. So 1 over b is just pi. And your equation becomes f of x equals, remember, it's a times the sine 1 over b times x. Fill in the 2 for a and pi for 1 over b. And there is your equation for that function. Please take good notes. Write everything down.